Hey guys, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to go over a couple of different ways to look at linear rules. In particular, we're looking for the y-intercept and the gradient. I'm going to be going over those two things. Let's say you're faced with an equation that looks like this one. Now, the common form equation, which is the standard rule, is y equals mx plus c, where the m is referring to the gradient, and the c is referring to the y-intercept. Right? And I'll explain what those two things are in a second. So looking at this original equation, we can see that since the m is attached to the x, so it's like the coefficient of x almost, it's mx, 2x, the 2 is the same as m, right? You can see that they're the same thing. So that means that the gradient is 2, right? And the y-intercept is the plus c on the end. So in this case, we can see that there's a 6. So c would be equal to 6, which is the y-intercept. But be careful, there is a negative value there, which means that the y-intercept is negative 6. And we'll go through in a second what each of these things mean individually. Let's have a look at this next one, because this one's a bit challenging. You should be able to see that straight away. It's not immediately obvious what the gradient is, but the plus c, the y-intercept is plus 3, right? And the gradient is x divided by 2, which is interesting. You might be thinking maybe the gradient's 2, which would be a good guess. Unfortunately, it's not correct. Now, when something is written like this, like x divided by 2, that's the exact same thing as writing a half times x. All right, so a half times x, and that makes more sense in this form, or a half x even. So a half x plus c, meaning that our gradient is a half. And we'll go over how to plot these things very shortly. Right. So now if we're looking at a linear graph here, the gradient is the angle in which it is sloping on. So in this case, there's a negative sort of drop off here, right? And the y-intercept is at what point does the line cross the y-axis, which is this vertical one. Okay, so looking at this rule that we have, or this line that we have here, we should be able to figure out the slope and the y-axis, or the y-intercept, sorry. If the y-intercept is the point where this crosses the y-axis, you can see it crosses at 5. So the y-intercept is 5. All right. Now we can try and find the slope. Okay. So if I want to try and find the slope, what I need is there is a specific formula, right? And this is the formula here. So m, which remember from our original equation means gradient. So the gradient or slope, which are the same thing, and it's y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. You might be like, okay, well, what does that even mean? That's like gibberish. So, okay, well, let's break this down and let's figure out what these things mean. What you need to solve this, you need to get 2 points of information. Now, one of these points, or coordinates, is probably a better phraseology, I guess, than point. One of these coordinates, we already know because it's the y-intercept. So it is 0, meaning the value of x at that point is 0. And the point that it crosses is 5. So that's one of our points. Okay. Now we need to find a second point. Now, normally what you would do is there would be some sort of grid paper, and I recommend just following the line down till you find a spot where you can clearly see 2 points. 2 coordinates have lined up very nicely on the line. Right. Sometimes there'll be a point, like in this case. Sometimes there won't be. Right. So if there's not, just search through until you find a point where you're like, oh yeah, that seems to match up pretty well. Okay, so in this case, we have the point here, which is x is 2 and y is 1. Okay, we have 2 points. This is point number 1. This is point number 2. Now I can label at the bottom here. This is the x of point number 1. This is the y of point number 1. This is the x of point number 2. This is the y of point number 2. Right? Does that make sense? So now I should be able to fill in this equation here. So m equals y2 minus y1. So that's 1 minus 5 divided by 2 for x2 minus 0. That gives me negative 4 divided by 2. Like, okay, well, what's 4 divided by 2? It's 2, and there's a negative. So that means my gradient is negative 2, meaning that this slope, for every one it goes across, it goes down 2, right? That's basically what that slope means. Okay, so now we can actually write an equation from this. If we fill in the information that we have, we know the plus c is 5, and we know that the m is negative 2. So that is the, oops, sorry, that's out of shot. That is the equation for this line. All right, let's have a quick look at one that asks you to draw. So this is one of the harder ones that you can do. All right, so I want you to draw this. So first, let's write it in as an equation. So y would equal, our slope is 3 over 2. So 3 over 2 x, and our y-intercept is minus 2. Now, first thing I want to do is, I know that my y-intercept, where it crosses this axis, is negative 2. So I can put that in there. Now, the key is I've got to find another point. There's a few ways that you can do that. You can just substitute a value of x in and see what y comes up with. You could just try and use the gradient to find the next one. There's lots of things that you can do. So let's substitute x equals 1 into here. And this will give us the value of y when x is equal to 1, right? So 3 over 2 times 1, or 1.5 times 1, is just 3 over 2, or 1.5. Minus 2 gives me negative 1/2. All right? So I know where x equals 1, this should equal negative 1/2. Right? So there is a point about there. So x is equal to 1 here, y is equal to negative 1/2. As soon as you have two lines, two dots, you can create a line through that. One straight. Right? So there you go. Oh, and my camera's just popped out. Love that. Sorry, give me a moment to quickly fix that. You just love it when things go wrong. Alright, so before I pulled the camera out, I drew a straight line through those 2 points, put some arrows on the end, and you label it y equals 3 over 2x minus 2, and you're done. Alright, and now all my cameras have stopped working. I think so. That's great. Just my webcam stopped working, so you're stuck looking at my stupid face. Righto. Enjoy the rest of your day.